There's an echo with you.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. On behalf of the Institute of Supply Chain Management, I welcome you all to an interesting webinar on a town hall on driving sustainability through responsible supply chains. As you're aware, the Institute of Supply Chain is an education, training, and research-led organization. We are at the forefront of bringing in the latest practices of supply chain to the Indian corporate world. We do undertake research on various contemporary aspects of supply chain. And one of the things that we felt when we were talking to multiple heads of supply chain and CEOs across the country was the word sustainability was missing from the lexicon. There were talks of all kinds of benefits to supply chain. We were talking about cost reduction paradigms. We were talking about service excellence paradigms. But the same passion is missing when it comes to sustainability. And as we speak and when we go closer to the subject, we realize that there's even a lack of understanding what sustainability in reality means. And so to kickstart this effort in sustainability, I'm not saying that there have been no efforts towards sustainability. There have been various ways in which organizations have come together to create sustainability. For example, the chemical companies have formed an organization called Together for Sustainability, and there are around 19 multinational chemical companies. Indian arms are also doing a lot of non-sustainability for just the chemical industry. So there are efforts underway to bring in sustainability, but we need to understand sustainability from a holistic fashion, and that's why we decided to create a town hall, and we decided to invite some of the world's leading thought leaders for sustainability. And this is the first time that we are attempting something like this, which is spanning across 3 continents. And therefore, I will move continent-wise while I invite my speakers. Today, we have a very interesting range of speakers with us. We have Hayley Jarrett, who is the CEO at Supply Chain Sustainability School in Australia, an experienced executive with diverse range of skills and capabilities. Hayley, welcome to the town hall, and we look forward to hearing from you. Moving to the home country, I would like to first invite Anu Chowdhury. Anu is the most awarded influential sustainability leader of India. She is also the founder and CEO of Sustain Plus. She is a visionary ESG leader who has a deep understanding of the mechanism to create real business value from socially and environmentally responsible business strategies. Welcome, Anu. We look forward to your views. We have with us Suhas Joshi, Head Sustainability and Business Stewardship South Asia at Bayer, who has a deep understanding of critical business drivers in crop protection, chemicals, and seeds. We now move across to the West, where we have Nancy Gillis, Sustainability and Circular Economy expert and CEO at the Global Electronics Council. She is committed to leveraging sustainability to reduce enterprise risk, maximize business value, and foster innovation. She is based out of Portland in US. And I would like to welcome Cynthia Clark, founder and current CEO, Women in Supply Chain Association from Alberta, Canada, who has done a significant amount of work providing a networking platform for women supply chain leaders to come together and learn. We will have Dr. Rakesh Singh, the chairman of the Institute of Supply Chain Management, and Shanmukh Singh, who is a consultant at the Institute of Supply Chain Management and who has been the driving force behind sustainability as a theme for the town hall. I invite Dr. Singh and Shanmugh to take this discussion forward.
Thank you, Girish sir, and thank you to all the panelists who have joined today, and thank you to the audience who have shown up today. Supply chains account for 45% of total emissions, over 35% of jobs in the formal economy, and around 50% of the world's GDP. This shows the sort of impact supply chains have globally. The global marketplace demands that supply chains be nimble and diffuse. Their broad distribution has elevated their significance beyond the functionality of manufacturing and transport, and they're transformative in the way they remake a corporation and the effect they have on our local economies. An efficient supply chain is responsive to changing priorities of stakeholders by keeping costs in line, schedules on time, and more importantly, giving companies the room to scale for growth while not shying away from the responsibilities it has towards the environment, society, economy, humanity, and the planet at large. In today's webinar, we will be discussing how we can reimagine our supply chains to be more responsible, reliable, and resilient in practice while building sustainable businesses. Most people will tell you the businesses are adopting sustainability due to changing consumption patterns. But no more than 2% of consumers today have sustainable consumption patterns. It's the pressure from governments, investors, and local bodies that is changing the landscape of sustainability in businesses. The importance of sustainability in a supply chain extends beyond going green. A supply chain built on a set of sustainable principles creates more partnership opportunities because environmental and social responsibility are a crucial focal point in today's industry. Practicing sustainability in every aspect of your business improves your reputation and your organization. A sustainable supply chain also helps improve productivity while saving money at the same time. By using sustainable techniques and resources, you increase the efficiency of buildings, vehicles, and machinery, leading to significant cost saving. Thus, there is an increased need and desire to adopt sustainability in our supply chains. With the incidence rate of disruptions going up, supply chains are constantly at a risk of being disrupted. Thus, businesses need to sustain themselves in the most challenging of environments. Integrating sustainability in your supply chain design and planning helps mitigate risks from both known and unknown sources. Sustainability needs to be looked at from a holistic business perspective. It allows for contingencies and helps you sustain in tough times. Sustainability is commonly misunderstood to be restricted to environmental, social, and economic activities, but in practice, sustainability has a business case that is often ignored or not talked about. Every business is equally concerned about the sustenance of its business growth, expansion, and the profits. This brings me to the first question of the day. What does sustainability within the supply chain look like? Anyone can take up this question. First to respond.
Want me to go ahead or someone would like to start? Is it good?
So as you can start.
Thank you. So gentlemen and ladies, particularly Shanmugh, thank you very much for this opportunity. Very interesting panel we have here today. Thank you very much. Let me clarify in the beginning itself that during the entire session, I would try to represent a sector which is usually underrepresented in all such supply chain or sustainability discussions. But that is very important sector from the global environmental point of view, and that is agriculture. I bring to the table around 20 plus years of experience working in agricultural industry in all different various roles, and particularly agricultural supply chain. In India, if we take the number, approximately 18% of the gross national emissions are attributed to livestock and agriculture. And therefore, any small impact on this sector can result in a huge impact on the gross national emissions for the country. From the economy point of view, the agriculture contributes around 15% of GDP approximately, and 15% of GDP and 50% of the population depends on agriculture. So this is what the importance of this sector to the overall economy as well as the sustainability. Now, how a sustainable supply chain looks like for me, it's very clear. My partners in the supply chain are smallholder farmers. My supply chain starts at the end of the value chain, where smallholder farmers produce commodities for me or companies like me. They toil for hours in their farms. Mostly the size would be 1 to 2 acres or around 1 hectare per farmer. And they supply this raw material to us, and then we process it, or we do whatever with that, and we market it. And here, for me, the sustainability means this farmer, the major component of my supply chain, himself is sustainable. He is profitable. He is making good money. He is socially well placed for his family. His children are going to good schools, getting good education. He is getting some. He's having a good standard of living. The social part and environmental part, of course, his farm should be producing as little CO2 or N2O or methane as possible, consuming as little water as possible, and making very little impact on the environment. This is what, for me, the supply chain looks like, but I would pause here and again enter into discussion if I given another opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Suhas. Would any other panelists like to take up the question? Yes, Nancy.
So I also very much welcome the opportunity to be part of a panel that is an important discussion with so many very expert speakers. But I come from a nonprofit organization, and what we actually help to do is define what are sustainable products in the technology sector. And of course, as you've mentioned, there is a lot of recognition by purchasers. And so we work with institutional purchasers, countries, so 42 countries right now work with our organization, and industry leaders who are interested in having their products bought by other large companies and who want to show that they care about sustainability. And so I live at the intersection of technology, purchasing or procurement, and sustainability. And to that question of, well, what does a sustainable supply chain look like? A lot of people think that a sustainable supply chain is different than what you would expect a supply chain to be if you were looking at efficiencies or resilience or innovation. But actually, it's that. It's a supply chain that looks at, from an efficiency perspective, minimizing the amount of transportation and packaging costs associated with the movement of the material goods. It is a supply chain that's looking at innovation in working with their suppliers in a capacity building perspective to make sure that those suppliers, be they the end farmers, are actually using as little of core resources as necessary, are able to use and have access to the best technology to have the most highest amount of output for their particular fields. And of course, it is something in which, when it's responsible, it recognizes that supply chains are made up of people. And from our perspective, people means that you are taking sensitivity towards, you want to have in that supply chain workers who feel secure and safe in the facilities where they are. You have a farmer or any other type of end worker who is actually able to, because they're in this field and giving you that core material, able to take care of their family, and want to continue, because of course what we in supply chain don't like is to have too much of the churn of having too many suppliers, right? So it's really when people talk about oh, I don't know how to do a sustainable supply chain, it's really doing what you're doing, but doing it incredibly well and doing it with an eye towards increasing efficiencies, increasing the engagement and support of your vendors, paying attention to how your vendors are working. In this era of resiliency, it's making sure that you have vendor pipeline in case a vendor can't perform. And it's really being sensitive to the fact that, yeah, you do need to balance both the environment, the social, but also the costs, and doing so in a creative and committed way. So that's how we kind of define it, and we're excited to see more supply chains become sustainable.
Thank you, Nancy. Definitely would like to see more supply chains become more sustainable. Sadly, I would say it's not happening as of yet. Not many supply chains are moving towards sustainability, and even which are, they are not 100% sustainability compliant, which brings me to the second question of the day. What are the challenges in developing a sustainable supply chain? I would like the perspective to come from the developed world as well as the developing world, because the challenges that lie are similar when we look at it, but not the same.
Yeah, I suppose I'm quite happy to kick off with this one as we go through as well. I mean, I think when most people want to talk about sustainable supply chains, the very first thing they ever think about are the challenges and the 14 reasons why they can't do anything in their supply chain to be able to get anything through. So I suppose this is probably one of the easier questions to ask everybody, because most people will have plenty of excuses as to why they currently don't have a sustainable supply chain. And I absolutely I love the definitions of the supply chain that we've had so far. And I was like, so yeah, absolutely, that's exactly how you define it. And the challenges of those are that in all parts of that supply chain, greed gets in the way and plays out different areas. So if you have a sustainable supply chain, is the least risky version of your business that you can possibly have, and yet this doesn't seem to be the most attractive place that people steer to. You know, if you look after people in your company and your supply chains, then they are going to give you the best back. Their efficiency is going to improve. If you look after your farmers and they can educate their children, then you're not only getting the best out of the crops for this year, but in 30 years and 50 years time, like, it just makes perfect sense that you would want to do this. And so usually the challenges that come up are human factors. Like I always say, the biggest challenge to moving to sustainability is behavioural. It's got nothing to do with the technology that's out there or the willingness or the ability of anybody to move in this space. It's actually changing the way that you do things now. And sometimes that means sitting back and acknowledging that you might have made a mistake or that you weren't actually doing everything the best way possible. And not beating yourself up over that, but actually saying, well, now I've acknowledged that, I can then make steps to improve this. And so there's many aspects of that. I mean, you're talking about people kicking things off. It could be anything from, you know, how do I make my supply chain more circular? You know, how can I start to look after people in my supply chain better? How do I ensure there's no modern slavery in my supply chain? That's a big factor from, you're talking about, I don't really like the terms like developing and developed worlds. I think the developed worlds can usually learn so much from the developing worlds. They think they're so much better than, and they're pushing everybody in the wrong direction. They, you know, the way that we've industrialized some things. I mean, I look back at the classic example of I'm Australian, and our Indigenous population, who have been around for 75,000 years, and yet nobody really sits back and asks them, well, hang on, you looked after this country for so long before we got here, and everything was fine and it was in peace and harmony. How can we ask our Indigenous peoples, well, how did you look after it? What did you do so differently? And now that we've come in there and we put up walls and we put up dams and the waterways have changed and we have massive bushfires, how did you mitigate the fire threat? How did you ensure that animals weren't harmed when these things happened? I think we can really sort of step back, and sometimes the simplest solutions are the best. And almost reflecting back on the cultures that people think are primitive are usually the ones that have it the most together. And they've been around for a long time for a very good reason, and we should all probably sit back and look at them more.
Shanmugh, may I go next?
Okay.
That, yeah.
Yes.
So I very much resonate with what Haley said just now. So according to me, there should not even be a reason to question why sustainable supply chain. But I also understand the limitations we are facing here. The thing is, sustainability is a buzzword. You know, it's a very, very hot topic right now, but it still intimidates people. So if you are asking your supplier to, you know, become sustainable, they immediately get worried that, oh my God, how much do I have to invest? How do I bring myself up to, you know, this benchmark? And who will help me do that? Where do I get the resources from? So, you know, so there are so many questions. So I would say that even before we get into creating these frameworks or, you know, creating these requirements for our suppliers, the first and foremost thing that we need to address is awareness. So make a business case for sustainability, show them how it benefits them, and then there would be no reason to impose this on them, you know. So it's just like the CSR rule in India. So I mean, although it has so many benefits, companies still see that as a liability. So let's make a case in such a way that it's seen as something beneficial for someone who's owning it, someone who's taking the initiative, rather than just trying to comply with the requirements. And that also brings us to the other issue, another challenge. A lot of suppliers, especially if you look at the small and medium scale industries in India, a lot of these suppliers have this challenge that even if we are, you know, honestly complying with the requirements of sustainable, of being a sustainable manufacturing company or a packaging company, there are the competition is so high. And if the other person, if my competitor is not complying with this, they are still able to get the orders, and we are competing with a very low cost. And how do we match that? If we have to maintain a certain standard, how do we match that? So take the example of minimum wage in India. Now, a lot of suppliers, as you know, also have, you know, these small and medium scale industries. They have migrant laborers who are working for them. Now, if they want to do justice to them, if they want to pay them the minimum wage, they also have to maintain their cost accordingly. But if finally the only criteria for a large company who's you know, taking raw material from these suppliers, if the final criteria is only cost, then it's not going to be sustainable, you know. So we have to look at financial and sustainable aspects together. We have to make sure that there is an incentive for companies to go sustainable in the end. Yeah, that's what I wanted to add here.
Deepak, are you there?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm on the call.
Okay.
So what are your views on sustainability as you deal with both the Indian subcontinent and the Chinese Asian continent, if you see? Deepak is on way to somewhere. He cannot be seen. He is only available on the phone. Yeah, Deepak,
So
please go ahead.
as an independent, you know, consultant or whatever we may say, you know, whether we talk about the Indian subcontinent or the Southeast Asia region or the China that I was talking about, I mean, you know, COVID has pushed us so hard that you know, we are all today forced in terms of seeing how sustainable our supply chains are, and if not anything, we are forced into driving our supply chain sustainability. And you know, earlier speakers have spoken about you know, vendor management for that matter, but for all practical purposes, you know, the whole elasticity of our supply chain has come under tremendous pressure, for the simple reason that we were always looking at how to maximize profits, and therefore trying to work on the low and on the cheapest cost model. So it didn't matter, where we brought the material from, even if we had to run through continents. Today, what we are starting to see is, if you really look at the whole piece, it's raw materials are becoming so much more difficult to get across. I mean, our entire chemical industry was based on raw materials coming in from China, and today the kind of issues that we have on even getting containers or even getting ships to come, the kind of freight rates that are being charged. Today you look at the whole auto industry, for example. Never before have we seen a situation where today auto companies are saying that we will take months together to provide the orders that you've booked, because we don't have microchips coming in from Taiwan, or we don't have microchips coming in from China. So we are all being forced big time to look at who are the people we are working with. Do we have backup plans? BCPs, business continuity plans, are being looked at like never before, in terms of, if you can't supply from here, when will you be able to supply? From where will you be able to supply? The kind of rethinking and the whole reorganization of network that companies are being forced to do is unprecedented and unheard of, and many of these are outcomes of what COVID has forced us to do. And there are tremendous raw material, packing material realignments that are happening today. Backup vendors are being created, backup sources are being created, backup raw materials. Today, because your standard raw materials is not available, you are looking at alternate raw materials, how you could make the same product, to ensure that you are able to service the market on a continuous basis. I mean, these are some of the challenges we are facing, or we are going through in the whole chemical market.
Okay.
Thank you, Deepak. One of the major points Deepak raised was over-reliance on suppliers to meet sustainability standards, and to an extent, we do end up asking too much from our suppliers. But suppliers have suppliers. There are too many tiers that suppliers function in, and meeting sustainability within the tiers is close to impossible, and monitoring them is even more difficult. In this situation, how do we foster and making sure that our suppliers comply to sustainability standards?
Yeah, yeah, no.
Yes, Nancy.
If I can, I have to.
Anyone. Nancy, you can go ahead.
I have to disagree with that statement, because that is one of those challenges that are put up. Supply chains are too hard. There are too many tiers. We can't be responsible for the sub tiers or our vendors. Yes, you can. And in fact, the purchasers of end products, the large scale purchasers, have an expectation that you increasingly do that. Now, it doesn't mean that it's not hard, but it's possible. And to go to Haley's point, the first thing one has to do is, for the direct relationship you have with your vendors, you need to communicate that you care, that what you're not doing is just a lowest cost decision, that you care how much they invest in what they're doing with their workers, how much you are willing to give on price point for costs that mostly sometimes aren't at all thought about, as in what does it cost to get the materials to the facilities, depending on where you are in the supply chain, because that's where unsustainability happens. It happens when you're not caring about what your vendors' practices are, thinking in environmental and social terms. It's when you don't clearly communicate to them that that's what you value. And if you don't communicate to them that that's what you value, why would you ever think they're going to communicate to their suppliers that that's what they value? So it starts with each and every organization within the supply chain. And it's not, as we started the conversation, that hard to do, because sustainability is efficiencies, innovation, it's cost savings, because you're paying attention to usage, you're making good business decisions, right? You're making those decisions. And when it talks about, like right now, COVID has been horrible on supply chains. And it's really brought, I love the point, business continuity planning, the need to have relationships with your suppliers and not just single cost, so that they are there and that you also have looked into supplier diversity and that you've looked at it from a perspective, and the IT sector learned about supplier diversity and geographic location when we had the tsunamis, because you also need to, for business continuity, think about suppliers, what they can provide to you, and build relationships outside of one area, right? So there's a lot in which, and yet you want to do that in balance with cost. So it's challenging, right? But it's not impossible. And our organization refuses to accept the statement of, oh, it's too hard to track. It's too many tiers in the supply chain. I would challenge supply chains to not give that excuse any longer.
Oh, completely agree with you, Nancy. And the one thing that even from a corporate perspective, most people look at, a lot of people do risk assessments for their organizations. And then you talk about sustainability and they say, oh, that's going to add another 20 items to my risk register. How many more hazards do I need to add that I now have to manage? And I always say, step back a second. Actually, sustainability should be in your control measures column, not in your hazard risk column, because it actually is a way for you to mitigate all of the risks that your business faces. If you have, increased events of naturally occurring extreme weather events, you need to manage that for your business. That's just being sustainable. If you don't start looking after your staff members and they are unhealthy, unhappy, not being paid correctly, they can't look after their families, they are not giving you the ultimate output in your manufacturing facilities. So guess what? You should be sustainable because you're going to increase your efficiency in your manufacturing. This is a solution to your problems, not in the risk column of your problem list. And every corporate board member around the world should be looking at sustainable procurement, whether that's the international standard or throughout its whole supply chain, as a way to prevent and mitigate and reduce the risks of their business. It's not around adding to them and increasing that through the risk factor. The other really interesting thing that's happening in Australia at the moment too is we've implemented a new Modern Slavery Act legislation in Australia, which is requiring all businesses who earn over $100 million to publicly disclose to the government on a public register how they're going about finding and eradicating modern slavery from their supply chains. One of the interesting factors that's happened through that mix is that violations of all types of sustainability are high risk red flags that are going off that you probably have modern slavery in your supply chain as well. Because not surprisingly, those companies that are having the environmental breaches and are getting arrested and taken to court for all sorts of other things, cut corners everywhere. And if that's the type of supplier you want to work with, as whether they're trying to cut your, what corners are they cutting with you? And so I think this is just one of those, you can think you're getting a good deal, you think that you're working with these people and they're doing you a favor, but you know what, you can race to the bottom all you like, but if you work with quality people, you're going to get a higher return and a higher quality and a more your business is going to have much more longevity. So I completely agree with you, Nancy, that this whole argument of it's too hard, I don't know, it's just cheaper, let's go and manufacture them everywhere and we'll pretend and turn a blind eye to the reasons why it's so much cheaper to import that product and why we've completely destroyed our local manufacturing capability in that area. Because that's why you have to acknowledge all of those factors. I sit back and say, would you send your children overseas to work in the factories that you're buying your chips in? And if you wouldn't, then maybe you shouldn't be manufacturing your chips there.
Just one more point that I want to add, that again, a lot of companies are now focusing on the whole ESG piece, and also trying to introduce ESG as a very, very strong metric or a parameter inside their medium and long term strategy, because sustainability is a lot about your medium to long term strategy and not just a short term strategy. Separately, environment, social, and the whole governance piece actually start to play such an important role the moment you talk about sustainability. Whether you talk about what is your commitment to water or what is your commitment to energy, some of these are longer term targets or longer term initiatives that you take, and therefore sustainability sits very, very well with your medium to long term strategy. And I think almost every company is starting to adopt and bring sustainability as part of their overall corporate strategy rather than just supply chain strategy.
Yeah, let me also add 2 cents here in the discussion. Quite interesting discussion with the contribution from Nancy, Helly, and everyone. The biggest contribution of sustainability in supply chain, from my point of view, is penetrating all the tiers of supply chain. With the tool of sustainability we have, we build up multiple relationships with each tier in the supply chain and reach up to the last one. When you have to work on, say, social standards or environmental standards, you are not happy just with the first tier where you interact with on a regular basis. You work with them, you go further, you go to the next tier, you further go to the next tier, and you make sure that entire chain is taken care of. And that's in that process. The process itself is valuable, where you build more transformational links instead of just being transactional, where your relationship with your vendor is pricing. This is beyond pricing. This is beyond transactional. And this is the real value of sustainability efforts.
Thank you, all of you. Nancy, coming back to your point of communicating with your suppliers. Yes, I agree. You need to communicate with your suppliers and make sure that they know that sustainability is important for you. But these are some instances that I'd like to point out where sustainability compatibility does not exist, and there is no desire to be compatible with the sustainability standards. Adidas and Nike had a problem not so long ago when they were producing in China, and the orders were above capacity, and labor laws. China does not have labor laws as such, nor environmental laws. Suppliers were flouting these standards as such, not laws, but standards very grossly. And apart from that, even Apple was caught into a similar kind of a situation where the environmental standards were not being met. So in such situations, how do you really enforce sustainability without proper laws? These are just standards that hygiene standards that we are expected to comply with. But moving on, I really don't think communicating as such can be the only way. We need to enforce these standards and make them into laws, because okay, there was this recent study Harvard Business Review did of masters of supply chain. How do they maintain their sustainability standards? And in that survey, they clearly point out that beyond the first year, no company really cares about the sustainability standards being met or not. And even in the first year suppliers complain that if we ourselves are not meeting the standards, how can we expect our suppliers to meet those standards at the same time?
Let me real quickly and then step aside for other speakers to participate as well. So you raised a really good point, which is the power of actually monitoring performance. So I think the first thing to lead to a responsible supply chain is to actually back up, first of all, to engage in the conversation with your first tiers and signal to them that what you are holding them to and what you're wanting them to perform is what you expect for them to engage with their vendors as well. So, and that's not only the conversation, it is modeling the behavior. So yeah, we'll see experiences in the IT sector where a company will say it's important, but when faced with actual evidence of it not being important, if it not being fulfilled, when they've put requirements on their vendors, that you have to be in the position to walk away. You have to actually back up what you're saying is important to you. And I'd like to point out, at least in the IT sector, that one of the companies who has done that and was first to do that was Apple. They actually dropped suppliers because those suppliers did not meet their sustainability or business ethics. Doesn't mean that all of them, but at least it's a signal, and a very strong one. But you're right. The second question is how do you monitor? And that's a big challenge, right? And there are enough organizations now, though, who are able to send surveys, if you provide them information about the suppliers, who will go in and actually ask whether or not your suppliers are meeting certain parameters that you set, and then vet that. And so there, EcoVadis is one. I don't, there's several, but as an example, if you want to see what kind of company. So there are organizations that a major firm could use to engage. But I will tell you, you are right. The monitoring is challenging. And I go back to, though, again, a point that was raised. It is very hard if you treat sustainability as just a requirement for your suppliers to change behavior. If you see it as the start of a relationship where you value their performance for environmental and social reasons, and where you maybe even bear some of the economic costs of upgrading their facilities or training some of their staff, or making sure that they have, depending on, again, IT sector, access to personal protective gear as they're working. If you care about it comes to those relationships, then it becomes self-evident to your suppliers that not only do you care and value, but also that they want to meet you in the middle, because what you're providing to them is something that increasingly, to Haley's point, there's going to be regulation, and there are going to be, we work with governments, there will be governments who will say, we only want to buy products that come from responsible supply chains. So if you're a vendor and you're changing your behavior, you are part of the wave of the future, because increasingly that is where the supply chains will go. So, but you're right, it's a challenge.
Well,
I'd like to
Rakesh.
Anu, can you go ahead with some of your views now?
Yes, sure. Thanks. And Suhas, sorry to interrupt. I think you can. I just wanted to add something to what Nancy said just now. So monitoring and evaluation definitely is the key. We will come to that only when we move away from this checklist checklist process. If you are handing over a checklist to your suppliers and asking them to just tick if they are complying with all the requirements, they would obviously just do that without even understanding the requirement, without perhaps going into the depth of it and trying to implement it. So it would just become another ISO standard, unfortunately. And I'm very sorry to say that. And I have been in this space for 20 years now. But where is the benefit of all those ISO compliances or all those certifications? If only, so we would not even be discussing this perhaps to a large extent, because it would be taken care of through these ISO certifications, if only they were just not a piece of paper. Now, what has happened is that, so there is this requirement that you should have your ISO, you should be energy efficient, you should have your quality management system or environment management system in place. And suddenly we had a fish market of these ISO certification bodies who were selling out certificates for nothing. And then it just became so easy to be compliant. But if you actually, so most of us here understand what these standards are there for, what was the whole reason behind this. If only we could make these suppliers understand that it's for your own good and these are the benefits this will get you, they would just go ahead and do it, without having to be pushed, without having to really use a stick, to make them comply. So I think capacity building, of course, it is a challenge. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. The initial few years are going to be challenging. There is a lot of hand-holding required, by consultants, by large companies who themselves have kind of crossed the barrier. And they now need to go ahead, map their supply chain, engage with the suppliers, have clear and regular communication with them, understand and communicate their expectations, and then start rating suppliers. So there has to be an incentive backed, with this. So they have to start rating their suppliers and also helping them improve their ratings year on year. And we have been doing this with our customers, and it has been a very successful process. And a very seamless process, if I may add. So we need to have a structure and framework, not just a checklist is what I would stress upon.
Thank you, Anu. My next question is for Cynthia. Hi, Cynthia. So how do we change this using technology, visibility, and traceability? All that we are talking about, can we change this using technology, or is it not possible? Can we build relationships with technology?
Actually, it's interesting. So I've been taking notes and just sort of pulling it all together. And technology, actually, I've spoken to a few individuals that are in the space, and Nancy might actually know some of them. And there are new digital platforms and tools coming into the market that are cost efficient. And that's where digital is going to take up that space, where you're not having to look at that ERP that is so encompassing that you can't really get past it, where you have that digital capacity to actually see past all the tiers, all the way through, and it is coming in. There's also technology that was designed out of Eastern Canada by a woman, where they do mining also. So you want to expand your supply chain, you want to have some visibility of your supply chain, and they find out who you've been using, what else is available, and then they go out and they do some research, they do some vetting to see what is actually occurring, and are they meeting your requirements? Like the comments, in terms of how we view sustainability, in listening to everybody, I think the number one thing that has to be addressed is an equal understanding, a clarity on what do we think sustainability is, because each country, each community, each society, each has sort of their vision, their view, and so if you can't get it across, it's no different than saying we want so many women in something, we want to have this community or this, like the Indigenous community. Canada's doing the same thing. We're starting to realize, oh, maybe we should talk to the people who did a better job than us. But if we don't have that clarity and that consistency, even in the technology side, even in the collaboration, we're basically just throwing things at the wall and hoping something sticks. I mean, I actually, honestly, in talking recently with a lot of, everybody's younger than me right now, I'm starting to realize. So in the new generation, it's, we have this vision that, oh, they're so entitled, they don't care, They're, what are they going to do? They're going to be, and there's going to be some. I mean, there's some adults that are like that, or some, but they're not like that. They're starting to really question things. They're starting to really demand. And when we start to pay attention to the end user, the purchaser, the people that are going to basically take a step forward, and they're digital, and they're very tech savvy, they're very driven, and they don't look at well, what about today? That we will see that requirement of, you need to show me. If you're going to say to me, it's your ISO, your little quick check, that's not satisfactory. I want you to prove, show me, and if I want to look, I can go completely down your supply chain and have confidence because it's now proven, not just hearsay or something in terms of it. You're right, the checkbox. It is that demand. Now, at the same time, it has to be global. We have to have this conversation. This is a fantastic, because we're not talking in one space. And, if India wants to do what they're doing to try and gain some value, they won't succeed if the rest of the globe doesn't participate with them. We're doing the same thing that we do with the people within our group, is we are now sort of isolating and setting expectations. And if we don't sort of engage across the entire sort of global reach, we're never going to really sort of set that standard of expectation and demand, because the cost of what's happening is the destruction of our resources. It's the destruction of our health and our quality of life. We're isolating full communities out of participating. And so if we can put the technology, which is coming, we need to make it available. We need to give people in control, push it past them, say, you're either in or you're out. And if you're out, you're not going to have that time. I do see that that's something that is coming, but it has to be a buy-in, it has to be global, and it has to have the communication, the conversation. It can't be per country, it can't be per industry. Like I say, supply, and the stats that someone says, well, 45% is supply chain, or the supply chain is everything we do and everyone in it. It's 100% of what we do. It's the people, it's the steps, it's the person that went to the store to buy it. They're a small piece in that supply chain. Everybody needs to be a part of the conversation. It can't be siloed or isolated, and it can't be limited to any one group or organization. And everybody has to step up and have the conversation. And that means, are we identifying? People are saying, are people, are they healthy? Are they thriving? If people aren't stopping, we're saying, oh, we have the pressure of bringing in the supply because, COVID, and we have issues. We haven't even had the conversation of what is the cost of the GDP on those that we have lost. What is going to be the impact? So if you lose people and they have a value of about $18,000 per individual in the GDP of the globe, and you've lost 20 million, that's a big touch. Now you've taken and you have a significant separation of women or marginalized groups being removed from the market because, well, it's just not working for us. Now your GDP is at another issue. So if we don't take the time to step back and say our decisions have to have some consideration because it's impacting the people, and you're right, it's not the dollar, because the dollar is going to be a bigger problem when you don't stop and look at what you're doing. And technology can serve that. And even though there's times when I question some of these young people creating the technology, it's getting them involved in the communication and the conversation to sort of say, okay, we need to see this. How can we do it and bring it together? So there's my piece.
Thank you, Cynthia. Very interesting points that I would like to focus on. Global effort. I agree. It should totally be a global effort. But how do we make it a global effort? You say that people where you live are questioning businesses, whether you're sustainable, whether you're responsible. Here, where I live, people are questioning me. do I know what sustainability means? Sustainability for them is sustaining themselves rather than sustaining the environment. So how do we make the effort a global effort?
Well, and I'm going to make a reference to a technology that I have no clue about and I am not engaged in, but I see it. TikTok. And I'm using this very casually just to make a point in terms of visibility. There is an example where if the conversation or the need to inform people is important, there's a platform. Are we using the platforms that are available in terms of exposing or informing the globe efficiently? Are Twitter? That's a whole, we can go down all these. The platforms exist to communicate. If the conversation's out there and it's messaged in the right manner and there's a equal understanding, you have to inform people before you just jump into those areas. You have to have a real understanding of the cost and make it tight and quick, because our attention span's limited. So we need to understand, how do we get the message? How do we make it clean? And how do we work it across the globe? We have the capacity to message. We need to be very clear. You can't have the ISO that's got 58,000 pages that you need to check boxes off. It has to be human-based. It has to be something that grabs somebody's attention at their core, because otherwise, you're right, it's just going to be that greed mechanism. How much money am I going to make today? How much money are you going to pay me? And the deal is I can say I can make money, but I can only make money until I deplete my people and my product. And then what good is it? So I'm just saying there's the platforms. It's communicating globally and having that conversation, because there's a lot of people in my space that don't think about what's happening across the globe. They just want their stuff, but they're not shown or made aware. And the news it doesn't really give anybody the right information. We don't realize the impact of losing. When somebody says, oh, we've lost 257 years, we've stepped back in terms of women's rights. They just think, well, that's just a number. What is that consequence? What is the consequence of the farmers that when we push them or they become depleted, can't work the land? Well, where are we going to get our resources? Where are we going to get our food? Where are we going? And we need to sort of have that conversation, but it needs to be very tight and messaged in such a manner that we reach the people that are going to make the decision on the end.
I'd just like to add something here to address Shanmukh's question about how do we address this challenge in this part of the world. So Shanmukh, one thing I'd like to highlight here is that this is a phenomenon across the globe, but also but a lot more prevalent in the developing countries, where we have somehow got into this habit of magnifying the problems, but not talking about the success stories so much. And unless we talk about the success stories, we cannot motivate people positively to move towards the right direction. It's always about, oh my God, this would happen, this is the risk, and this is the disaster we are facing. And then a layman or a small business or even a large business, first of all, thinks about their own survival, of making money right now, because you don't know what's going to happen 10 years down the line. So why should I be investing in saving the environment or taking care of the society when my own survival is at risk? So that's the perception that comes in. Whereas if you are able to highlight stories like, where all these progressive companies like Mahindra, IBM, Tata, so many examples out there within the Indian arena, where companies have saved billions of dollars just by being responsible, by following responsible business practices, and they've gained so much out of it, and they perhaps some of them did not even do it for being responsible, in the first place. It was just a side effect, and they wanted to do something. They wanted to perhaps become more efficient in their operations, or make sure they are mitigating their supply chain risk, and they implemented certain measures. And in the process, they saved on their costs. They became more resilient. And so these sort of stories are to be told, and I think that would just make the process much easier for others to transition to this side of the table.
Thank you,
I'd like to, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Nancy.
Suhas,
Yeah.
let's get Suhas in the perspective, primarily because he comes from a sector which deals with a large number of marginal farmers, as Cynthia or even Anu is talking about best practices. I think this sector has been seeing a whole lot of sustainable, non-sustainable practices in the domain of consumption of pesticides and fertilizers and those things, and how companies have been behaving. What has been the changes in the sustainable practices over the years to us? The last I did some assignment for any agrochemical company was in 2010. That's Syngenta, but I think I haven't heard anything from any one of them. Let's look at the transition that's been taking place in agri supply chain, and largely the agri supply chain, which is largely rural supply chain. When we sell them all these agri input and the catastrophic effect that has on land output as well as the quality of the land. So what are your views on that, Suhas?
Well, Rakesh, over last 10 years, there has been tremendous progress and tremendous change. Particularly the multinationals in this business are driving the change, and the majority of them, if you work with Syngenta, there are many such companies, including Bayer. We take sustainability, I don't want to repeat this, very seriously. Our business decisions are based on at least one element of sustainability in that. Even the highest of the decision at the mergers and acquisitions, sustainability plays a very important part. And therefore, in our supply chains, there is absolutely no possibility that we can live with something less than sustainable. Now, the complexities here are different, of course, because the farmers, we deal with smallholder farmers, and they don't run MSMEs or they don't run companies, and their level of awareness is a bit limited in terms of sustainability. So education and awareness amongst these farmers becomes very critical. I would again reflect on whatever everyone has discussed. It's all about relationships. It's all about long-term view, and it's all about a journey. Sustainability is not qualifying a particular vendor today for his compliance with the parameters of the checklist. This is about working with our farmer vendors for a long term, 5 to 10 years, with a proper vision, and making sure that they walk with us. So today they may not be sustainable, their practices may not be sustainable, but their intention to walk with us, that is important. If they have positive intentions, then they are good for us. We are willing to closely work with them, invest in them, invest our time, our resources and energy. And we would like to see that over the next 5 to 10 years, our supply chain sustainability standards improving to the next level. That's what I could say about this.
Let me add, I'll add from your company, Aventis. And that was 2003, and I thought a very important relationship issues that we need. I visualize it in my 3-4 villages, 3 different villages. One was Guntur, and it was near Baroda, and one was in Chennai. What we found was that the differences between use of Confider, right? Confider is a product for whiteflies. It used to be a product for whitefly. Bayer was the owner. We found that the technical team and the marketing team of Bayer worked so strongly, or Aventis at that point of time worked so strongly, that they were able to bring a huge change in the use of pesticide. All pesticides are toxic, and they have DDT as a base. Maybe things are changing now. But what I saw was that a Bayer contact, they used to call it as a contact form, and a non-contact farm. The non-contact farm, if you see a single pest, the farmer starts going and sprays for multiple times, 20, 25 times. But buyer was able to say this, that don't spread. There is a resistance within the plant. It can deal with the pest. You have to do it only 3-4 times. And that kind of a sustainable practices, I see it happening all across. Some contact that I still have with the agribusinesses, it's happening. So I think relationship matters, your ability to show how it really benefits you, because farmers thought that 20 rounds is must for you to survive the pest. It was only 3 rounds and you save so much cost. So I think the relationship matters. And also I've seen in agri, Suhas, which is very important, we were first very transactional in nature with the farmers. We sold anything, and the whole distribution system pushed the wrong product and the spurious product. Then we started coming with a solution called as total plant protection. Then we started giving them some solution to the total plant protection. And now I think the whole industry has gone through a transformation from merger and acquisition, where life sciences, and it has become a kind of a life sciences where seed has started dominating and pesticides have taken a backseat, and this transition is happening. Meaning that there's so much of sustainability that has come up even through such practices in agribusinesses. I think that India has a huge challenge, and I think that's the history that we've seen in agricultural sustainability. There's a lot more to go. There's a lot more to see, and lots of companies. Anu, a little comment on what you said. Some of the companies, you made he made a statement saying, okay, this must be not intentional. And I think most of these practices which has benefited these companies have not been intentional. But there are so many other companies, and those have done a great job. I think one such company which is in focus is ITC. ITC in India creates a relationship with farmers called as chapals. But they have gone far beyond that. They have built up sustainable ponds, sustainable communities, sustainable this thing in not all places, but some places. And I think the kind of relationship that holds with farmer, they've gone into organic in a big way, which is helping ITC Foods to flourish. So it has become an arm of ITC Foods. So I think sustainability is seeing a little bit of leap, not so much as it ought to be, but in the agricultural sector and companies which India is saying, a little bit of corporate social responsibility used with business sense and create a business model as work. There are some who just do social responsibility for the sake of it, and then they don't add any value to the sustainability as such. Yes, I'll go over to you.
I'd like to make one kind of comment just on that sustainability. When you're talking about the farmers, and I think that's critical, we need to bring in all commodities too, because if we focus on one and we forget the others, they're impacting each other. And I think that when we need to include everybody so that the farmers aren't impacted by something else that's in their space.
I agree. If I understand your question comment properly, I think there is a lot of change also that I will say in India which has happened. Though farm protests are blown out of proportion for a very strong national political reason, I would say that India has seen an amazing amount of vertical coordination, not only on the input side, but also on the output side. And when I'm talking about ITC, ITC is one company which sources soya, wheat, and other things and feeds through its own ITC food businesses and creates a lot of sustainability, even the economic sustainability framework for the farmers, improving their well-being. And it has been a very grand success, and it could be a model for growth in a developing economy like India. So there is a two-way from the market urban to rural and rural to urban. Both the things can be really integrated together to build an ecosystem in the rural markets. And I think not one experiment, there are so many experiments. There are certain aggregators, local aggregators that are not talked about in the literature today because of the rise of the farm protests. but they have done amazingly well in building this particular sustainability with relationships and have benefited farmers and aggregators as well as the processors. And I think it's a very win-win situation that has emerged. Like Anu was saying, get some experiments from the market. These are very good experiments from the market that can be looked into it. So I think good examples of what can be done to bring sustainability is there. In fact, there is a tester by the name Anna Hazare. He has done in a semi-arid tropic, which means you have less than 10 inches of rainfall. He has transformed his village into a greenery, and he has linked his vegetables and fruit markets to the global markets of UAE and others where organic products are. He does not use anything. He uses organic products, and he's doing amazingly well. There's 90 or 100 experiments in this country that are running. So the sustainability in this country amidst the developing part, or what do you call it, the underdeveloped part of the developing economy also is very high. I will stop here. Yeah.
I think you touched on a really good point of, and just one thing that I think we probably need to challenge is that I know a lot of what we've spoken about so far is like when you buy, you are somehow needing to improve the sustainability of the people you're buying from, and I think that is an assumption that is not always true. And in fact, I know a lot of suppliers that wish that they could sell things and operate more differently because the people who they sell to don't want to buy it. So I think that we have to challenge that there's the assumption that the big players need to impose on their supply chains to make them improve. And a lot of the time, some of those suppliers may have all the practices and the technology sorted out, but they just can't find anyone to buy it. And it's a massive challenge in that market. And I also think that there's this challenging of you need to do this as part of an insular part of your organization. This is somehow going to give you a competitive advantage over everybody else in your market, that you're going to outshine everybody else. The organization that I run is true testament to that not working together. So I have a bunch of competitors who are all members of my organization who sit back and say, we're all competing with each other, but we know there's a collective benefit in us working together to create an educational resource for everybody. And so they literally every year pay fees to us and collectively sit around a room and develop educational materials and then give them away free for the entire industry. So we've got a whole stack of sustainability resources for anyone working in any part of the supply chain within Australia. You can log onto the site. I go and do face-to-face workshops when we're allowed to. I'm allowed to travel around. And we train everybody. And I speak to small businesses and I speak to everyone up and down the supply chain who learn a little bit and go, oh, you know what, we do that. We just don't call it that. Or I didn't realize that if I told you that I do that, that would make me a more valuable supplier to you. Oh, I didn't realize if I wrote that on my tender, that would actually help me get that next tender. And so now 5 years on, we're starting to see those small businesses who like the mum and dad businesses and in like different industries like construction and manufacturing, who, you know, they might inherently say, well, of course, half of our workforce are women, you know, because why would I want my daughters to not have the same life experience that I've had? Or, oh, of course, yeah, well, we've got a lot of people that are disabled in our town and we just employ them. And of course, we've got that diversity. And wouldn't it make total sense that I hire Indigenous people and train them up in my business? Like, this is all things that we just inherently do because we're good people. I didn't realize that if I wrote that on my tender application, there'd be a more viable supplier to you. And sometimes it's just that educational platform. And sustainability is a wonderful thing, and yet it's like any other industry, completely full of jargon and completely full of buzzwords that float around that, exactly like Andy was saying before, they scare the bejesus out of people. I always say to people, oh, I know it's the S word. Like, you know, don't say the S word. It'll get everybody offside. I talk with a bunch of tradies, so like tradespeople like plumbers and electricians and the full stereotypical version of that, and they don't want to talk about climate change, and they think, oh, you know, another greenie, what are you going to go hug a tree? They're like, no, this is going to save your business. This is going to help you win the next job. This is going to make sure that you're going to stay employed for the next 30 years. We want to make sure that your business is going to stick around, that you can make lots of money. We don't want you bidding at the lowest margin, because that's not a good way to run your business, and you aren't going to be around for us in 10 years. We want to make sure that that happens. You know, I have members of my organization that publicize the fact that they don't take the cheapest quote, because they tell people, we don't want the cheapest quote. If you can't meet these minimum requirements, we are going to hire you. And they will turn around and say, you actually, like, you know, especially we've got like an issue with cleaning contractors in Australia of, you know, you can't possibly deliver me the standard that I need at the price that you've quoted on here. So I'm not going to give you the contract because I know that if I give it to you, you're going to have to cut the corner somewhere. And it's most likely the workers that are going to suffer from that. So I think that there is this, you know, this wonderful part of this whole part of the community that we work in, that we can actually just say, hey, we might compete with each other and we're in all this together. And people rally around the Sustainable Development Goals. And let's all try and achieve them together. And instead of saying, here's 40 reasons why I can't do things, take just one step. You don't have to do anything big. Just, you know, everybody who's on this call can hang up and do whatever they do and do 5 things before they finish today that put themselves in the right direction. You know, have a conversation with one other person about sustainability and see what they think. You know, tell one other person your idea. Connect with one new person who you've never tried to connect with before on LinkedIn and just read their profile and find out what they've been up to. You know, join one organization. You know, put a recycling bin in at your office desk. These things are all extremely little things that can have this butterfly effect through everything as it moves forward, and are all attainable things that you can do today. You don't have to solve the world. Everyone is trying to rally all this together. Do it with everybody else, but do what you can do and make one step.
Okay, that was quite an interesting point, Haley. But how are we all in this together when Australia's per capita carbon footprint is around 16.92 million megatons? I'll pick up the US 15.74 megatons, Europe 6.97 megatons, UK 5.62 megatons, India is 1.86 megatons. How are we in this together?
Well, of course we are. It's a global footprint, and everybody rallied around the world at the industrial revolutions of the world all differently. And I think that, I mean, I get this question a lot. And it's around how do we want to evolve and do that? And that's not to say is one person right or wrong. And I think that the next step that usually comes from hearing statistics like that is, well, how about why should we bother? You know, if everyone else is so much worse than us, why should we even bother? And so, look, you know, what am I doing? I do a thing in my country where I'm trying to improve those statistics for my country. And there are global market factors, and I investigate and talk with different stewardship groups and look where all those factors are, about where all those emissions are, and systematically go and target them. And sometimes that is, you know, there's a lot of people who choose to boycott things that are that. My approach is a little bit different. I'd love to go in behind the closed doors and try and make changes in those industries. But I think that we can. The other thing that I find really interesting as well is those geographical boundaries, like what you just put up. Because we've all proven, you know, for the last hour or so, that the world really doesn't have any boundaries. You know, from an environmental point of view, there are no geographical boundaries in this. We can put fences around where people are located and say that certain countries are putting more or less emissions out of that, but we ought to have a global place to play in this. You know, I was talking about TikTok before, you know, and I think that we've started to see these global revolutions and really knocking down these geographical boundaries over where things are at. The next generation are looking for that transparency through. It doesn't really matter which country that you're in. If you're going to try and hide an environmental breach somewhere else, then that's going to come about. And I think one of the key trends that we're starting to see over the next decade for action is this push for transparency. Transparency is going to be the driver that's going to push everything out into the open, because it's becoming more and more accessible to people to learn all of the hidden secrets behind all of their supply chains, to learn where all of these things are, and to put all of those factors out, you know, in the front of everybody's mind so that we can't hide behind them. And I totally accept the fact that, you know, in terms of Australia, our emissions profile is shocking. It's kind of one of the reasons why I do what I do, because I want to be able to change that. And it would be quite easy for me to turn around and say, it's too hard, it's too big. You know, well, if China's not going to do anything, why should Australia do anything? We're a really small country. If America is not going to do anything, then why should we do anything? And when you start to face that mindset, then that defeatist mindset, then nothing will ever change for good, and evil will win. So you have to start somewhere.
So basically,
well, I think that's why we're talking about supply chains, right? I mean, that's why we're talking about supply chains. And we're not talking just about one particular country And I really love the conversation about, how do you explain to your neighbor why sustainability. So let's all agree that sustainability, having that word being around for so long, is puzzling to so many, and maybe has even lost its value. In fact, maybe it's become counterproductive. So, but when we talk about, I love to use examples of, there's so many already successes, and we should focus on those successes. So maybe what we talk about, and I'd be interested how many people would have come to participate in this particular town hall if we hadn't talked about sustainability or responsible supply chains, or if instead we talked about making your supply chain more resilient and supplier engagement to support long and short-term financial viability of your suppliers, to where they are more efficient actors and are positioned, helping them communicate what they do to where purchasers actually really value it in the terms of investing in their own people and the efficiencies of their facilities and how they choose to transport their goods. If we talked about it in all of those terms, everybody would be like, oh yeah, I'm very interested, I'm committed, right? But the moment we say sustainability, people are like, I don't know what that is. That's challenging. That's just going to be lists. I have no interest in that. You're right. But that is what we're talking about. And if we don't have sustainable supply chains, if we don't have every segment of that supply chain, even maybe we shouldn't, when we talk about sustainability, talk about supply chains, but value chains, because if we don't improve the value chain, which is impact and consumer behavior, we're not going to see the reduction in GHGs from a national perspective, right? Because, right now the US, those GHGs aren't emitting due to the fact of the great, manufacturing base that we have. So yeah. From that perspective, it's the entire value chain. Our conversation here, I think, is on supply chains. And I think if we strip away the word sustainability and talk about, investing in relationships and efficiencies and valuing short-term the ability of your vendors to make a profit so they stay around, and how to help them do so, I think everybody would agree, but we don't talk about it that way. Maybe that's the problem.
That's it. One of the points you make in terms of that sort of taking away the word sustainability and coming to what is it that we're trying to achieve, it comes down to sort of saying, and client being, from the farm to the manufacturing to the all of that is client survival. Your client needs to survive, and your client is the people that you have displaced. It's your consumer, it's your vendor, it's who you are. If you don't say, and it's coming to that, if we do not recognize that it's client survival, it's our survival, and of course that becomes, oh my God, very dramatic. But it is dramatic, because if you look at what some areas are doing to their people and hiding that's critical. The theory about, if you drop a pebble in the water, somewhere else you're going to have a tsunami. That's what's happening. When we say the environment's bad, and we say this place is bad, this place is bad, but we're good. Well, no, the globe, the air is around the world, not just over there. And people just become so myopic, and it's, well, my space. And the point is that when you do give those statistics about how, well, they have this much, they have that much. Well, the problem is that we've asked Australia, or we've asked India, or we've asked China to take on a role of doing a manufacturing, production, mining, and because we're not going to do it and we'll do something else. So of course they look good, but it's a false good, because we've pushed our problem to them, so now we can blame them. So it becomes that whole thing. We haven't created value because we haven't done anything for ourselves. If we internalize our survival as a client or as a part of the package, maybe we'll get that visibility and not worry about the checklist. I don't care what the checklist is. I want to make sure I'm going to be okay. And that's maybe a portion of that messaging.
Okay. Coming back to a point Anu made earlier, that we need to highlight case studies or success stories to foster sustainability further. Most of these success stories lie in the business world. In the consumer world, people are just consuming. They're not having success stories out of being sustainable consumers as such. So is it time we move away from consumer-centric approaches to sustainability and move towards more business-driven transformations of sustainability? Because as you said, most of the sustainability that comes about is not even intentional. It's just in practice.
I think that's a
So,
good question.
I
Is it
have a
time we
very,
move away from
Please.
I have a very strong opinion on that. To be honest, I would. So, what I certainly don't understand is why do companies find sustainability or their social initiatives as something which is a cost center or a liability, whereas they spend millions and billions of dollars on marketing and branding. So why are these two isolated from each other? So your point, the point that you brought up, Shanmugh, about customers sharing their success stories, don't you think if you combine branding, advertising, or marketing with consumer experiences, after using sustainable material, resources, raw material, whatever it may be, don't you think it would just make the case of sustainability that much more acceptable or easier to adopt? So we don't, so I mean, when I talk about sharing success stories, it's not just from the supply chain, it's from across the value chain. When customer demands, you are bound to supply. I mean, you have to, otherwise you're out of the picture. And why do you think, so, this story is very similar to the story of organic food that was, so that started about 10 years ago. So when this whole movement started, everybody was like, so there was too many questions, too many doubts around authenticity of such material or such food product. And now it's everywhere. And at least when we come to upper middle class consumers, I would say about 25 to 30% of them at least prefer organic material or naturally sourced material. So the same kind of experience, it could be replicated for sustainability as well. The moment you start talking about the benefits, the moment you start sharing, how your experience has been. I mean, so nobody has to pay me today for me to talk about brands that have been organic or natural, so how they have helped me. No one has to pay me to do that because I have experienced it myself.
Okay, very good. So I've been an sort of regenerative farmer for about 2 to 3 years, and I'll share my experience with you about organic farming. Organic farming is unsustainable than what I'd be using biochemicals, spraying my crops with chemicals. It's much more unsustainable than that. Organic farming is a sham that we just go into believing. There's so much information asymmetry in the organic farming market that the consumer does not even know what's happening. So the success story of a consumer who's consuming organic products is hardly a success story that I would believe in as a farmer.
I totally disagree with you, Shanmugh.
May I request that we steer away from this topic? It could be
I would not agree with that opinion, Shanmugh. That's a very I would say that's a very sweeping statement for the entire organic farming market. And we have, of course, in every market, we have
Let's
authentic
get back to
products, we
the
have fake
sustainable
products.
supply chains.
Yeah. 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 Okay.
I would just like to say though that there is, if you talk about the value chain, there is a role for the consumer. But our organization actually focuses not on the end consumer because of some of the challenges that have just been mentioned in end consumer behavior, both in informing and influencing. What's really, and I think a trend that is relevant to sustainable supply chains, is the focus on institutional purchasers, on governments, both at national, city, municipal levels, as well as the larger types of institutional purchasers. And they are being influenced because they are hearing from investments, they're hearing from risk. I mean, many, of course, of the countries who are buying are doing so because they're looking at the well-being of their communities, their citizens. And so I think when we talk about why sustainable supply chains, part of the challenge of defining is actually taken care of because those purchasers are starting to define what they mean by a sustainable supply chain. And I know earlier some of the conversation came about the limitations of ISO as certifications. There may be the limitations in which those have just become a checklist and haven't really actually created change in a supply chain. But whether those limitations are there or not, those large-scale purchasers, where with one decision they are buying millions of something, foodstuffs inclusive, those are the ones who are really going to stimulate what that sustainable supply chain behavior may be, because they're the ones who are using these certifications and standards as a way to define. So I think there's, even as we have talked about maybe the limitations of the word sustainability and backing up and talking about sustainable behaviors without using that word, and we've talked about the limitations of checklists and how that may not be resulting in embedded behavioral change. What we can't deny is that definitions do exist that are used by large-scale purchasers right now, and those are being backed up by regulatory behavior. And so there is a need to at least understand what those definitions look like, or it really is a cost to competitiveness, cost to actually being in the market and being a viable player. So I would just point to that role of a consumer, the large-scale institutional consumer, and how, whether we like it or not, how they're starting to define sustainability. I think it's important to acknowledge.
Just like to add a point to what I was saying earlier. I know you say that it's a sweeping statement, but studies show that organic farming lead to 15 to 20% more emissions than regular conventional farming. That I just wanted to put it out. It's just because it's discussing
we will have to
sustainability.
have another panel discussion on organic farming, and I'm not an organic farming expert. That was just an example about how we could make sustainability more
showing how approaches to sustainability would not yield the results that business-driven sustainability initiatives can derive. It's just a debate, so I'm just pointing it out.
Again, drawing a comparison here, there would still be cases even within the sustainability domain where you would see greenwashing happening a lot, and it's happening right now. And that's where we want to move the agenda towards monitoring, evaluation, impact assessment. So this is the key to making sure that you're actually able to achieve the outcomes that you have promised. And I mean, there's no other way out. There would be greenwashing to a certain extent, and you cannot avoid that. And everyone has their own reasons of doing that. What we need to do is we need to move them away from those reasons and show them the benefits. And I think this whole discussion has been centered around the benefits, the actual outcomes of sustainability.
Anna, I
I
agree
think,
with you. And
I
then there's
think,
one
can I
point,
make
sorry.
a statement, Heli?
Okay.
Okay, yeah, Cynthia, go ahead.
Yeah. And that in terms of that sort of the messaging and statistics, I think that we also have to take into consideration when we're doing our studies and we're doing our vetting and we're reading the news, and that one document has the research that we think that's value. That we need to have like this kind of global conversation where those statistics are truly vetted across, so that the right information is being received. Is that what they think, or is that what they can prove, and how did they use their analysis? So there's got to be a fair playing field in terms of how we make that evaluation on any category. Nancy, 110% institutional decision making is having an impact, but at the same time, it has to be fair across global. And if we're going to do that, there has to be visibility. So if a decision's made on institutional and they are all public and somebody owns their share in their decision making, it has to be more than just that, because they are still driven on profit, and they will make a decision. They will say you can't buy there because of this, but they're still forcing a decision based on my return. So there's got to be sort of a clarity and visibility and accountability that the institutions are also being faced with, in the governments, and everybody has to play in the same field, and everybody has to be aware of it. So if I'm going to that institute, or I'm going to that that organization, and they're looking at that, it needs to be really clear, and everybody needs to be a part of it, and no one message can be too lopsided.
Let's move on to
Haley, you're muted.
let's move ahead in the conversation. I would like to ask, yes, sir, and Dr. Singh, do you have anything?
Yeah. No.
You want to ask him? Okay, so let's talk about circularity. Is circularity the starting point towards a greater sustainable world, or is it the end result of a greater sustainable world? How do we see it?
Yeah, I think it's a great segue from what you were talking about before, actually, circularity, because like we find that, especially when like we're talking about greenwashing and making a lot of environmental claims and then trying to figure out where you're going to get to with things. I think one of the big barriers for people making any sort of real progress in this space is getting hung up on, if I can't do everything all at once, then I'm not going to do anything. And so I think that there's, you know, in terms of can you nitpick a particular argument over where something's not perfect? You know, there's a lot of people that do full life cycle assessment on multi-criteria analysis, not just carbon emissions, to say whether something's environmentally sustainable or not. Then you can look to actually do social life cycle assessments to say we're always vetting everything against each other. And I know that on the program that we're now, there was that question around the triple bottom line sustainability and people, planet, profit, and, you know, how can you really do it all? And I think the key is that all of those, like in life, all of those different implementation things are always going to constantly pull at each other to try and figure out which of those things are we trying to balance in order to try and get the best outcome for everybody at the end of the day. And circularity is a concept that is no different than any of that. I think circularity makes so much more sense because a lot of people can look at it in terms of efficiency. Would you throw money in the bin? No. Well, why are you throwing that thing in the bin that's valuable to you? And if it's not valuable to you, it might be valuable to the person down the road. We've become so insular in terms of if it's in my gate, out my gate, and then it's gone and I don't think about it anymore, that we've lost these efficiencies that used to just be so natural in all of our, not just industrial processes, but agricultural processes. And I'm sure that's asking a lot of that, but I mean, I know a lot of farmers don't waste anything, and they deliberately plan their crop cycles because they know that certain crops are going to, you know, push nutrients into the soil, and then the next crop will take those same nutrients out of the soil, so that you don't need to spray pesticides or fertilize in certain aspects. And they've been doing it that way for years because it totally makes sense. And I think the circularity is amazing. It's certainly not a new phenomenon. I mean, people have been talking about the elements of circularity and recycling and being really resource efficient and not wasting things And most businesses, if they look at it through that sense, have already been doing that for so long. I think the real benefit then is actually turning around, and I always say challenging things like, if you're paying someone to come and take any sort of waste stream away, if you gave that challenge to your sales team and asked them to try and sell that waste, I bet you'd get a better outcome for it, because there's usually somebody who needs that as a sort of a fuel for their next step. And to be able to come and go through and do that. And as natural resources are becoming so much more scarce in the global world today, more and more and more attention is being forced into this second, third, and fourth circle of goods to be able to reuse them and get in there. So I kind of think it's an interesting thing. I think circularity is one of those buzzwords that we don't want it to get overplayed, so it just turns into like another S word that we don't want to talk about or that people cringe about. But circularity just makes sense. I don't know anyone's not doing it at the moment, even if they're calling it 3 different things.
And circularity, I mean, I'm not so sure how much anyone else would admit to it, but I think as an Indian, or being coming from that culture, it's in our DNA. So we don't waste or throw away a single T-shirt. So you would wear it first, and then you would use it for something else, and it would finally end up as a mop or a duster in the house. So so you don't just throw it away. I mean, we've had this culture in India where people would come, take away old clothes, and they would give you new utensils in return. So I mean, so again, all your waste is being reused, refurbished, recycled in some way, and that's been our culture. And our parents, I'm sure, didn't know any of these terms, circularity or sustainability or any of these things. They just felt that it was the right thing to do. Right, as in not even from morally right, but just the natural thing to do. So and that's all we have to adopt. And now we just somehow find it below our standard to follow the same practices. It's just ridiculous, I would say. So we just have to bring back all those old practices.
So Anu, you said it's in our DNA or in our culture. I totally agree with you. As kids, we are taught about the circle of life. Moving ahead, there is so much circularity that we come across in India. So the in India, there is a black market or the informal market, which is twice or thrice estimated, twice or thrice India's actual GDP. And that whole market is a circular market. They reuse, reduce, and recycle all the 3 R's of sustainability. Market that does not even have a formal setting. So that was an excellent point, Anu, that you brought up, of how in India we look at circularity just a very different way because of how we are brought up, how we are taught about circularity, and how things end up in a circle. It just goes round and round. Going ahead.
So when it comes to climate change, Shanmugh, when it comes to climate change, we are together. We are not together in problem. We are together in solution.
Exactly. I don't understand something about climate change is there's no circular behavior. Okay. Let's talk about geopolitics, because sustainability is not isolated. Sustainability and supply chain cannot be isolated from geopolitics. And geopolitics is a bit of a dicey topic where immorality is so high. And with the current movements in geopolitics and climate action, the Paris Agreement, the whole Paris Agreement looks like it was just made to satisfy people who care about sustainability or who care about the planet. Other than that, I don't see the point of the Paris Agreement. India has met most of its Paris Agreement it is still meeting. 2030 will be the end year where we might see a 2°C compliance. We are at 1.5°C compliance, but no other country in the G20 is compliant even at 1%. So how do we? Yes, Nancy.
I think I want to step back and take your point of geopolitics and circularity, because I think there was an unanticipated positive outcome when China refused to take waste as it did before. And all of a sudden, countries who had grown comfortable in saying, well, it's not my responsibility, found that they had to make it their responsibility. And I think that's where we get to circularity, because even with the example of reuse, at some point in time, you're going to have to stop being able to use it. Even at some point in time, the mop isn't able to serve as a valuable mop anymore. What do you do then? And sustainability gets you to t-shirt, to maybe cleaning, to mop, but sustainability still ends there, right? At that time, if you just think about sustainability, you're burying it, or you're burning it, right? You're trying to maybe pull the t-shirt back apart, and that's where circularity comes in, right? Circularity is when you're trying to use that end product and take it apart to material flows and put it back in for somebody else to value. And so I thought, when you talked about geopolitics and circularity, one of the most beneficial impacts to circularity was China closing its doors to other countries' wastes. And maybe this is the type of unanticipated positive impacts that we will continue to see, because if we don't do something to actually create more circular products, ones that you can break down to their material flow and put them in, we're going to run out of place to put our waste. And if that's going to happen, right, more doors will close. So I think your point of geopolitics is a very important one.
Certainly, Nancy. If we see China's behavior, it has understood that geopolitics is immoral, whereas other countries are still trying to play the game of it's you, it's not me. China's clear, it's me, but it's going to be me, and I will be the culprit, and I will play the victim card. That's what China does. So nothing on that. Apart from that, let's move on. That topic can get very heated when it comes to geopolitics.
Just remember, no, there isn't anybody on the globe that's doing it perfect, and we're all flawed, and we can always point the other finger, but then when you point the finger, you've got three more coming back. So I would say, yes, they're not great, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do better. And we can always, there's that example of saying geopolitics. Yes, I think we should have everyone should have to have a longer term commitment, but there isn't anybody on the playing field that's got a winning argument, that we all have something that we're hiding that we need to face. So yeah, I don't think we should point fingers. We're all kind of got stuff to fix.
Yes, pointing fingers is not leading to any productive discussion as such. But going ahead, I'd like to close the debate. Last closing comments on this question. Is sustainability really the integration of best practices for people, planet, and profits all at the same time? Or is there a dilemma here?
Well, thank you, Shanmugh. I take this initiative. This is absolutely, sustainability is important for planet, profit, and people. Hello, can you hear me?
Can we all limit to 2 to 3 minutes because we are exceeding the time? Thank you.
I would limit myself to 30 seconds. So I would fully agree with you that all the people, planet can be achieved through sustainability measures. That's very important. And the most important takeaway for me from this discussion is it is important to work constructively together as a team on this topic, and they should not be worried too much about geopolitics or individual country or individual companies' behavior. This is too important to be left to such issues. It has to be done personally with personal initiative and as a team. Thank you.
Anybody else? Yeah, Cynthia.
I'm going to get you to just quickly sort of give me a rephrase on your questioning, because just so to understand what you're trying to achieve on the question.
You are unmute.
Sorry. Can we integrate the objective of fostering sustainability through benefit? It should benefit all.
Okay, so and
The
I'll have
people around us. And,
so Haley made a good point. Actually, everybody's made really amazing points, but it really comes down to when you get off of here, do one thing. And when you do one thing and everybody does one thing, it's amazing, you know, 7 billion people did one good thing, it'd be quite a remarkable result. So the reality is that it's a small step. Education is critical. There's so many people who don't understand what we're talking about, and then we give them these expectations of fulfilling something unfairly. And so there's a whole communication, a conversation, a shared and patience, and culturally, I can't make a judgment call from Canada on another country based on what their beliefs are, but we need to talk. So I think it becomes one step, one conversation, one moment, one reach, and taking some responsibility and being okay with the fact that we created it. We can't worry about it and say, well, I'm not doing nothing now. Yes, we can. And that's how I see it, us all moving forward. Every little piece and every little communication is the key. And that means in how we interact and how we care for our people and our culture and our countries and everything. So thank you by the way, and thank you very much for inviting me.
I'd just like to add, thank everyone over here for the very interesting discussion on the panel today. And Dr. Rakesh Singh Shanmugh, thank you so much for inviting me. I would have to take your leave because I have another meeting at 4 p.m. But it has been great, and I think we should continue our discussions offline as well. There's just so much to do, and I'm just always very excited about this, about the huge potential we have going forward.
Yeah, I have to second all of those comments. I think this has been an amazing conversation. And in relation back to your question about people, planet, profit, I live in a wonderful world where I run a not-for-profit for a living. And so on a daily basis, I'm not just facing the world of profit. I have to look at people and I have to look at the planet, and forcing me to have ulterior values than just more. It's actually quite refreshing and happy to be able to sit back and go, I just need enough money to do what I'm doing. I don't need more. And I get all of the sense and satisfaction and joy of achieving so many other things that make me feel like such more of a fulfilled person and contributing so much more to this world than just making money. And so I challenge everybody just to step out there and look for something like that and get some joy in your life apart from just making coin, because you know, if you just need enough, and then be happy. And that's really sort of a really nice nexus to be able to work in. I hope everybody gets the opportunity to have that in their lives.
So I just want to also thank everybody for this incredible conversation. The time has gone much too quickly, and I really enjoyed all the points that have been raised. To the question, I believe that there is balance between the economic, the environmental, and social, and that for the first time, I actually think that we can engage from a supply chain perspective with our vendors and acknowledge the importance of economic viability for them, but help them in achieving that without having them give up on their value of the environment and social. And I think that's, to me, the benefit of talking about sustainable supply chains. And I would agree that if there's one thing that COVID has caused for everybody, it is for us to step back and to think about what quality of life we want when it means that potentially, and sadly, so many of friends and family have succumbed to where we might not have that life. And so I think, Haley, your point of, looking at what we are working for and appreciating what is possible is a very valuable one, especially now. So again, thank you so much for allowing me to be part of this conversation. And I will have to reach out to some of the panelists because you've raised some really interesting points that I want to continue to explore. But thank you.
Thank you all. I would like Dr. Rakesh Singh to present some closing remarks.
I thank all of you, Cynthia, Haley, Nancy, Suhas, Anu, and Deepak for bringing about a very, good debate on sustainability. Sustainability, like any other issue, is highly debated and perceived subject. So, it could have a lot of dimension to it, and it can have a lot of positivity in it. I want to sum up a few things which are very important points that Nancy brought about and everybody touched on. Post-COVID, resilience becomes a very important element. Resilience in our downstream, that is suppliers. And if you look at the bill of materials and look at the tiers, there are multiple tiers. If you look at auto, there are 130 tiers, 430 tiers, depending upon what you use. As Anmukh rightly brought about that these tiers need to be brought into the process of visibility. And I think Nancy was saying that there are so many companies. I know of some companies like Resilink and Lamasoft. They have a huge mapping and they use Google Map kind of alternates to find out where your supplier is and where does he lie. You have a complete visibility of the supplier in the last tire. During the tsunami in 2007 or 8, Ford had a problem. It has 250 tires, but in one of the tires, 27 tires, which contribute 0.02% of the total value of the material that you source, the chips were not available. It held your businesses for 2.5 months. If we can really use a very strong mapping exercises in global businesses, you can then also map these with the social and governance and and sustainable practices. And I think if businesses start looking at this in a big way, then there is going to be visibility both on the downstream and on the upstream. In the downstream, there's a lot of companies that are doing amazing job of using control towers. Control towers are a mix of IoT, a mix of blockchain, a mix of artificial intelligence to bring visibility, and that brings about an automatic routing of the trucks, which reduces the distance and the emission. I think the technology part is a very important supply chain part, where by intention of what Haley said, I would love profit, that would become highly profitable by optimizing the supply chain cost and increasing your reach. And even if you sell as much as you do, you become more profitable. Second part that I would like to bring in here is that with the autonomous trucks, drones, delivery can be so easy in most developed part of the world, and it's also in any part of the world. You save so much of carbon emission on vehicles. And if you use multi-modal in India, the government has brought about a road transformation, a sea transformation, a waterways, and also rail. If you have a combination of multimodal logistics, it's estimated that in the next 5 years, you can save carbon emission or fleet pollution by 25%. Third, world needs to move little further. If I operate from my own sphere of influence, I will not add to the circularity. Looking at alternative businesses are not similar, but similar need-based businesses. I can share my warehouses. I can share my trucks. Trucks which go to 30%, 40% can be shared with another 2 or 3 players. It goes 100%, and I get number of tons. So inventory turns increases, my profitability increases, but the whole number, total number of trucks that being used is half by sell by half, and that really makes a circularity. I think there is a large need to it. Finally, and not the least, what Nancy brought about, when what Shanmugh brought about, these are challenges of sustainability. You don't understand customers' preferences, getting them to understand. I think we cannot be ignored. They need to be understood. We need to move to us. But what is happening is that if you look at Marks and Spencer's buys cotton from something in Kutch in Gujarat, organic cotton, they have outsourced that particular facilities to this particular institutional buying in fair price frameworks or organization which supports these things, and in a vertical value chain, a vertical supply chain can help. But they are so limited, Nancy. They are 0.2% of the total world vertical integration. That world has to move has to go a long way in terms of this. Geopolitics, yes, it is going to be difficult. And I think this is where sustainability in geopolitics is a very interesting issue. Why? If I'm sourcing from so many countries, and if I can find a finger at one, 4 comes at me, but they point 4 goes at them. Everywhere the world is going to, and current geopolitical trends are something for a nation like India. I need to be very, very, very resilient. How do I become? I will try to see if my time of survival is less than my time of recovery, I'm dead. I need to relook at the whole relocation of this. And when I do this, I do it in a sustainable way. I look at a better mode of transport to do it. I need to diversify from China +1 or China +10. I don't know. World is looking at that particular. So geopolitical politics is looking at reshoring, remanufacturing in the local basis. How do we do this? And all these are challenges that are also providing space for lesser the distance between supplier and the company. It's better for the carbon emission. Look at what somebody brought about this container crisis by Deepak. World is facing a huge container. Why? Everybody wants to export. Nobody wants to import today. The containers are lying in places where there is no exports and are wanted in places where there is export. This is the global supply chains also have to be restructured so that we don't waste energy and resources, and optimization of transportation, sea, air, and the multimodal framework within an inland framework is important. So I think this angle did not come up, so I thought I'll take up some time to bring about it in supply chain. And supply chains are moving to a sustainable, connected planning, connected optimization, and a complete end-to-end supply chain without resilience on one hand and without sustainability on another hand are not futuristic. And I think we are moving towards that. So I thank everybody as the chairman of the institute for having participated in this. We would like Cynthia, Hallie, Nancy, Suhas, Anu, and Deepak to be part of our further this thing. We are learning sustainability as all of us are on the learning curve. Maybe the learning curve is also a product life cycle curve for this. And wherever we are in the curve, we need to actually contribute towards the sustainability of this thought process itself, so that sustainability becomes important. So thank you very much.